There's more voiceover work out there now than there ever has been in the history of the world. When I book a job directly with a client, I'm not paying my agent 20%, and I get to have direct contact with the client, which means I can surprise and delight them. You're going to be competing with people that have been training in the craft for years and decades. The early part of your career is figuring out, what am I good at? What do I have a passion for? And what do people hire me for? If you have the grit, the resilience, the drive, the organization, all the intangibles that you need, you can absolutely do very well in this business.
Tell our listeners what exactly you do, what your expertise is, what kind of business you have. We love to hear just the entry point of who you are.
So I've been a voice actor for the last, it hurts to say this, 26 years. Most of the stuff, I'll say 50 to 60% of what I do, you probably wouldn't hear. It's corporate stuff, explainer videos, anthem videos, product demos, product launches, internal videos, medical narration, corporate training, things like that. Maybe about 25% of what I do, depending on the time of year, is commercials. So that's local, regional, and national. And then the rest is just kind of dribs and drabs. I might do the occasional documentary or the occasional in-show narration or the occasional phone menu, anywhere there's a voice needed. The only real genre that I actively don't participate in is audiobooks. I've done a few of them. They're really long form, and I don't enjoy the work, so I don't do that work anymore. But that's the voice acting side of my business. And then I have another business where I teach voice actors how to find work largely in the corporate world, right? Directly from clients and prospects without relying on either their representation, which would be agents and managers, or on gig sites like Fiverr or Upwork, or even specialty sites for our business called Voice123 and Voices.com. So when you work directly with clients and you, as salespeople say, kill what you eat, you have a little bit more control over those accounts and those relationships because you're dealing directly with the decision maker.
Cool. I want to get into a little bit of your coming of age story, like how you got started in this and a little bit of what your entrepreneurial background was. Because it's not, I don't know if I want to say it's not something people wake up and say, I want to be a voice actor. Because I've actually had that moment myself where I'm like, this would be really fun if I could just use my voice. What a cool way to make money. But what was kind of your aha entry point into this industry as a whole?
So I was on the radio for about 15 years. And when you do that work, when you're on the air, part of your job is to produce commercials for the radio station. So after your shift, they give you a pile of scripts and they send you into the production studio, and you've got your sound effects and your music beds and your voice, and you put together commercials that will run locally on that radio station. And I did that for 15 years. And that's how I got started in voice acting. But very early on, I realized that what we were doing at the local radio station wasn't as good as the stuff that we were getting in from even the local advertising agencies or from national. And those had higher production value. They were more nuanced, just better overall. And I started to dig in, okay, why is that? How do I get better at this? And I bought a book by a guy named Sandy Thomas, who in the 90s you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting a Sandy Thomas commercial on TV. He did a ton of national brands. And he wrote a book called So You Want to Be a Voiceover Star. And Kirsten, I ate this book like food. I consumed it. And I ended up writing a letter. Remember letters? We used to drag a pen across a piece of paper, right? I wrote a letter to Sandy, and he wrote me back, and he was super supportive. And we're still in touch to this day, crazily. But so I started to dig into voice acting. And at the time, I really made a hard push to get into it. I got the demos made. I got, headshots. I had the 5-minute cassette tapes for my demos. And I pushed really hard for about 2 years. But I was in Wilmington, Delaware at the time, which is about 20 minutes south of Philly. And even Philly was barely a top 5 market at that point. And what I learned was that if you weren't in New York or LA, and this is 25 years ago, if you didn't have representation, meaning an agent, you didn't have any access to coaches because there was no such thing as online coaching in those days. You had to be in New York or LA to even have access to the coaches. And if you didn't have all those things, you didn't work, right? And I went so far as to even take an unpaid internship. I was like 30 years old at Mike Lemon Casting in Philadelphia to try and learn the business from the inside out. And what I learned was not what I wanted to learn, but it was the truth that even in a market as big as Philly, the on-camera talent got the voiceover work because they already had the relationships, right? And so after 2 years, beat my head against the wall, I did what radio people do. And that is you take a few side clients, right? People will come and say, hey, you did our radio spot. Would you do our cable spot? And they throw you a few extra bucks to do that. And nobody's the wiser and everybody's happy. And I did that for a very long time, close to 20 years. And then I started to see my friends from the radio business going full-time in voiceover. And they weren't in New York and they weren't in LA. And so when I dug into it, I realized the world had changed, right? We now had YouTube. We now had digital video. Every company had become a media company. And people were able to go freelance full-time without necessarily even being in the union, SAG-AFTRA. And when I realized you could go after clients directly now, I went, well, I've gotten out of radio. I learned to sell. I was a career salesperson. I said, well, I've been selling for other people for years. Why can't I sell myself? And so I hatched a plan to go full time. And within 9 months, I was able to do that. And because of that early success, within 3 years, I was making six figures. I was making more money than I ever made in any job. And because I knew how to sell and I knew marketing. And when I combined that with the behind the mic work, that's how I had some success. And so I came to learn that my success was not common. And not everybody could do this. Not everybody had the skill set. And so that's when I began to start helping people do what I did, just find work. And then I formalized that into a course. And then with the course, we built a community around that. And it just kind of snowballed. And here we are.
Amazing. So with that being said, if our listeners are maybe someone who doesn't have the extensive background with already doing something in that space, something in the creative space of doing radio or anything voice acting, where's the first place to even start? Do you provide any nurturing on that in terms of how do I even hone this craft? How do you know if this is something you could do?
Right.
Just even with the skill set itself, before we get into marketing and building it as a business,
Sure.
Where do you recommend for that?
So I have a document, and I can send you the link if you want, called 7 Steps to Starting and Developing a Career in Voiceover. And it's free, but it's a few pages long, and it's a general roadmap, and it just gives you 7 steps to lay out sort of chronologically. And the first one is research. The first thing you can do is kind of just stick your toe in, not even get on a mic yet, just figure out, get a few bearings. What I mean by that is join a few Facebook groups for voiceover people. And we make some recommendations for you of ones to join. But start lurking and listening and kind of soaking this stuff up by osmosis. The first real step is training, right? And to do that, you've got to figure out where the coaches are. Most of the coaching now is done online. I still coach today with my commercial coach, Tina Marasco. We do our sessions over Zoom, and it works great. So online coaching is a thing now, and it's very effective. But you want to research a few coaches. And that's why I say when you start with research, you can start to see names crop up and you will begin to understand who the reputable coaches are, because our business, like any other, has its fair share of snake oil salespeople that are not good at what they do. But thankfully, they're few and far between. And so through repetition and osmosis, you'll get to understand who the reputable coaches are and then interview them. Most of them, not all, will offer a free consultation or a free first session, depending on the coach. And that's your opportunity to kind of understand, do I vibe with this person? When they speak, do I get it, right? Because I believe 80% of coaching is good fit, right? You've got to be able to pick up what that other person is putting down. You got to be able to communicate with a fair amount of facility, right? And then after that, and people think, well, okay, so that's all just to get a good demo made. It's not. It's to get good at the craft first. And that doesn't take a weekend or a month. It takes several months, for most people, at least a year, to get baseline competent in voice acting. And here's why. You're going to be competing with people that have been training in the craft for years and decades. And so this is not, if you decide you're going to make a business out of this, you got to understand the competition. And the competition in this business is fierce. I don't mean it's ugly. In fact, it's the most collaborative, supporting community I've ever been in. But people are highly trained and highly skilled. And if you don't become that, then you're relegating yourself to doing, work for, $5 a holler and just being a hobbyist or an amateur or a hack. And for people that want to do it for a business, they have to understand the training comes first.
Do you see a lot of people who take the time to do that, invest in their becoming better at the craft, that are able to do, I know you mentioned, you're kind of unique in that you've been able to grow it and make six figures, but do you feel like that if they're willing to invest that, it is a crucial step and that you're far more likely to get to that point, assuming you combine those other elements of marketing and sales, that it's possible? Like it's worth
Well,
the
sure.
investment because it's fierce, but there's plenty of opportunity there for you to become to be lucrative.
I say this all the time, there's more voiceover work out there now than there ever has been. Meaning, all the digital media that's being produced now, there's just more volume than there ever has been in the history of the world. So the work is out there. Do we have downward pressure in our business from external factors? Sure. AI is taking some work, right? There's a lot of uncertainty as we sit here in the fourth quarter, almost the fourth quarter of 2025. There's global economic uncertainties. Companies are playing things a little bit closer to the vest. There's not quite as much work as was being done maybe a year ago even. So there are always forces that are conspiring against us in our businesses. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible and it's not doable. If you have the grit, the resilience, the drive, the organization, all the intangibles that you need, then yeah, you can absolutely, as long as you train well and as long as you're coachable, you can absolutely do very well in this business.
Cool. Okay, before we move into the business and marketing side of this, I just want to maybe give some awareness to people listening. Radio announcing might be kind of obvious, but what are some other things they might consider? Oh, I might really be good at this, and I would have never thought of that as an avenue. What are some other skills that people typically have or background that they could have where they don't realize the relevance that it could translate over?
Well, broadly, we have people in this business that come from every conceivable history, walk of life, and skill set, right? Because this is, I believe, it's a skill that you can learn as long as you are coachable and have a good coach. That said, there are certain sort of feeder industries that tend to crop up over and over. We have a lot of ex-radio people, ex-television people. We have a lot of theater people, a lot of on-camera actors, right? That's kind of intuitive. Voiceover tends to be sort of an ancillary practice for a lot of people, but it's not all the time that those skill sets always translate well. What I mean by that is, for example, I was on the radio for 15 years. There is a different habit and skill set and sort of flavor or nuance that is inherent to radio that is not inherent to any voiceover work whatsoever. There's a big difference between a radio read and a really nuanced national commercial television read, right? And there's a difference between those two and medical narration. And promo is entirely different from audiobook, from in-show, from you name it, right? Everything requires a little bit different skill set and its own level and flavor of nuance. So all of those are learnable, I think, but any given person is going to have more talent in one specific area, one specific genre. So part of the early part of your career is figuring out, what am I good at? What do I have a passion for? And what do people hire me for? What do other people think that I'm good at?
Kind of the core questions that any entrepreneur asks, no matter what business you're endeavoring to do, right?
Yeah.
Like those are the fundamental things to know. And we had a guest on here who talked about the power of positive constraint. Like you work within those parameters instead of, oh, I could do any job for any person, whatever. If you find kind of your genius zone and even just the place that other people see as your genius zone, it makes getting jobs and getting hired so much easier. So for you, you can share with us a little bit of what you found for yourself to be very lucrative. But even for anyone else who's looking at this, talk us through what worked so well about your own methods to becoming really successful in this industry where what you said was not mainstream. Like the way you approached it and the sales and marketing experience and background you had made you have a very different experience to what most have in this industry.
I think it was mostly my experience in sales and marketing, right? Because once I got off the air in the radio, I went to the sales side of the business. And then outside of radio, I did a lot of sales. I worked for technology companies. I sold a very large $1.7 million website to a Fortune 500 company. And so I had a lot of sales and marketing background. And when I combined that with Like, I remember the moment I had the epiphany, like I went, oh, I've got 4 or 5 skill sets here that when combined, I might be able to make a run at this, right? So with sales and marketing, it was some mic work, although I didn't even at the time realize how much I had to retrain myself in terms of skill sets for specific genres like commercial. But having that sales and marketing background is a huge advantage because I knew what it took. And because we have so many people that come in from the arts and from even backgrounds that just have never done sales and marketing, everybody, I hear the same thing from most voice actors. People feel icky. They don't want to be annoying, right? And for good reason. Nobody wants to be annoying or off-putting. They feel like they have to chest thump or pat themselves on the back to sell themselves. And what we do, we are literally selling ourselves. We're selling what only we can do, the way we can do it. And so people have a fear of marketing. They have a misunderstanding of it. They think that it's all about getting something from somebody when in fact it's really about being in service to somebody and helping them solve a problem in a collaborative way. And so I had that mindset coming in. And so building my own voiceover practice, if you will, that was the natural way for me to do it. It's not the natural way for most people that come into this business. And that's why I teach, what I do and how I do it to folks that don't have that background.
Mm-hmm. So talk us through a little bit of that framework of how you do that outreach and how you gain those clients, because you have that backbone of understanding sales, but even just on a tactical level, where's the best place to begin? Let's assume you've already gone through coaching, you've been honing your craft, you're continuing to improve. Now getting those first gigs and starting to get your name out there, what does that look like? What have you found works really well for you?
Well, this won't surprise anybody with a sales background, but it's about identifying the decision makers. And the way that I teach that is in the beginning, yes, you're researching individual prospects, right? You're trying to find out the likelihood that they're going to hire a voice actor, that they do the kinds of projects that voice actors participate in. And when you first start doing that, you're looking at, yes, individual granular people. But if you did that every day as a matter of course, you would spend, God, even if you spent 15 minutes researching a prospect, you'd send, 4 emails an hour, right? You'd reach out to 4 people an hour. And that's just not the kind of scale you need to really grow a business. And so the way that I teach it is you build personas, right? Marketing avatars, ideal clients for each genre, maybe multiple personas or avatars for each genre. In other words, for, let's say, commercial work, you might identify small agency video producers, medium-sized agency creative directors, producers at video production houses, right? So there might be 3 different personas or avatars you might use. Once you've deeply researched those, now you can say, oh, okay, Kirsten's a small agency video producer. I kind of know what her problems and challenges and pain points are, and I can write messaging specifically to that without having to research her specifically deeply every single time I reach out to a small agency video producer. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you just start doing that back end research to compile these avatars. And then what does that look like in execution? Do you have automation built into that? What's the best way to start finding the right contact person? And when you say like marketing and the messaging, are we talking about the way that you're emailing them and the way that you're addressing them in the outreach? Or are we talking about like you market yourself to the masses and you have more of that attraction marketing? Have you done both ways, or is it mostly outreach on your behalf?
No, I mean, for my coaching business, it's attraction marketing. It's content marketing and being out in the marketplace. Sometimes it's even paid media. Voiceover works entirely differently because it's a service-based business and it's a one-to-one service-based business. And by nature, it's always custom, right? Nobody is buying a package of recordings that is pre-produced and ready to go off the shelf. Everybody's script is custom. So really everything is, we would use the word today, handcrafted, right? Because you're literally producing a unique piece every time you step behind the mic. So because of that, the direct one-to-one outreach is the best way to grow the business. So you asked about tools. You can start with LinkedIn Basic, right? You can find decision makers on LinkedIn. You can use Boolean searches to be able to find the kind of people that you're looking for. For example, ad agency and creative director. right? And you can start to build lists that way within LinkedIn free. In our particular program, we use a tool called Apollo.io, which is, I think, has even more power than LinkedIn itself to be able to build prospect lists and to filter based on certain criteria. And you can build those criteria around the personas that you've already researched, which is the beauty of it. So that's the lead gen part. And then the outreach part is having that clarity on who you're reaching out to. You're now able to construct very tailored, very specific messaging for each one of those personas. Because if the people don't want to be annoying, right? The best way to be annoying is to provide no value and to be irrelevant, right? And to reach out to the wrong people. So if you reach out to the janitor with something that says, hey, I'm a voice actor, do you have any work for me? Well, you're not providing any value to that person. You've reached out to the wrong person to begin with, and you made it all about you. You've not made it about the possible problems or challenges or pain points that person has. So it's getting clarity on who the decision makers are, what their life looks like, and what they deal with on a daily basis, and then being able to speak to that when you do the direct outreach.
Would you say that still to this day, a lot of your clients come from that outreach, or do you get to a point where you can sustain based on referrals and repeat? Like, how many of the people that hire you again versus you're constantly out there having to find new gigs?
Yeah. I tell people as a general rule of thumb, if you want to go full time in this business, I think it takes, I used to say 3 to 5, I now say 4 to 6 years to really build a strong, stable client base in this business on a full-time basis. Because it takes that long to acquire clients and then to get repeat work. Because, one client, for example, I work with one particular Fortune 10 company that I do their C-suite meetings. I'm the announcer for their C-suite meetings, and it's all pre-recorded. They send me the script once a quarter. But I get 4 jobs from them a year, like clockwork. I have other clients that only hire me once a year. And I have hundreds of clients that I've done one-off jobs for. Because they might only have 1 or 2 jobs a decade, right? Literally. So it depends on the client. But when you find those repeat clients and you're able to build that relationship directly and provide value directly and to anticipate needs and to underpromise and overdeliver and all the sort of tropes that we know as business people, when you're able to do that well, that's when you build that repeat business. But it does take time. It's the long game.
I want to rewind just a little bit, and thank you for that, because I think it's good to have that responsible approach of don't expect this to be an overnight thing. It's going to just take that. It's any business, right? It compounds. You have your repeat customers, your new exposure. Everything just takes time. And then you kind of hit those quantum leaps where you're like, cool, I've built something pretty sustainable and I have a pretty strong foundation here. But when I said I wanted to rewind a little bit, we kind of talked about find that genius zone, find where you actually want to thrive and the type of jobs you want to take. As you were just talking and you're expressing, I work with these corporate clients. I work, more in that industry. Is that something that people should consider? Like, are there some industries that are more lucrative than others that, we don't always just want to be doing it on where's the biggest money, but just give us some of the nuance to understand like benefits and, maybe the non-benefits of working in different industries.
So I'll give you probably 2 genres of voiceover that might be pretty easy to understand. First is commercials. And whether that's local, regional, or national. When I audition for a commercial, typically these days, mostly it's national. I might be in a pile of auditions. Maybe over 1,000 voice actors may have auditioned for a Nike spot, a GMC spot, these big national brands. Because the end client, let's say it's Nike, they're going to work with a casting office who's going to have a casting director, who's going to put that casting out to multiple talent agencies across the country. And each talent agency may have 100, 200, 300, 400 people submit an audition. That might be in the wheelhouse for that particular part. So by the time the casting director gets all those castings in, there could be well over 1,000 voice actors auditioning, right? So that's one paradigm. Another paradigm is I might reach out to, let's say, a medical devices company, right? I might reach out directly to, let's say, their head of video production and say, hey, Kirsten, my name's Paul Schmidt. I'm a voice actor. And if you're anything like the heads of production that I typically work with, you have problems A, B, and C. And here's how I work to solve them. If you think it might be advantageous for us to have a chat or you have a project come up, that you might be able to use me for, I'd love to team up. Boom. Right? Now, here's the thing. You think about this one paradigm where I might be in a pile of 1,000 voice actors, but I might get on this guy's or girl's internal roster. They might have 25, 30, 50 voice actors that they keep on a roster because they don't have the time to maintain contacts with thousands and thousands of people. If I can get on that roster, even if they ask me to audition, I might be one of, last week I did an audition. I was one of 3 voice actors that the audition went to, right? So your odds of booking go up. You have more control over that relationship. When I book a job directly with a client, I'm not paying my agent 20%. I'm not paying a pay to play or a casting site or a Fiverr or Upwork. I'm not paying them a cut. And I get to have direct contact with the client, which means I can surprise and delight them, right? Because I have that direct contact rather. And it's just such a better bond and gives you a little bit more control over the relationship. You're going to have churn no matter what the relationship is, whether there are middle people involved or not. But when you deal directly with the people making the decision and the people that are putting the work together, you have a lot more collaborative spirit. You have a lot more control over that account.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think you even mentioned early on in the conversation, like we want to find those alternatives where a little more of the control is in your hands. You're not relying on having to pay agencies and pay these third-party tools. They're helpful and they have a place. But I think what you're talking about, yes, it requires a little more time and a little more effort, but it's going to be a lot more lucrative in the long run. So I appreciate that perspective. I think, again, I find the way that this applies across the board to so many different industries. If you're in a service-based business, take the time to have the outreach. Don't rely on someone else to just go and connect the dots for you. Really know what your value is, really know what you bring to the table, and then just take the time to do that research and find the ideal clients for you and where you can step in and be incredibly impactful. And I think, so I'm curious, as you've done this outreach, and even as you've taught people, have they been like, wow, I would have never really thought to just reach out to random company. And now you mentioned like there's so many more people in need of the media creation for their businesses. How do you recommend people start to narrow that down and to find those interests or those companies that they're going to most resonate with based on what they have found that they're really good at? Because, we have the mass commercial like Nike, like you said, versus the corporate. And then even within that, I'm sure there's a lot of micro niches and ways that you can kind of pick your lane, right?
Yeah. The way that I've done it, I think for newer talent, for newer voice actors that are just beginning to build their businesses, I recommend starting with 2 demos, one for commercials, generally local and regional, and one for corporate narration. And, starting in those 2 genres. And the reason is commercial will always teach you to be a better actor. And that will translate to no matter what genre you're working in, the more you can deconstruct a text, be able to understand all the background of whatever the scene might be. Really solid acting training will make you a better narrator, medical narrator, audiobooks, you name it. If you can take improv, any acting classes, if you happen to be a singer, take singing, anything that teaches you to perform and to perform off the cuff will make you better at what you do. Corporate and commercials where I recommend most people start. That's where I really started to dig in, especially on the corporate side, because I knew I could go after those clients directly and I had that skill set. What I've done since is each year I pick a new growth area. One year it was promo, right? And promo is essentially a commercial for a television show on that network, right? So, tonight at 9 on an all new, SUV. That work is highly deadline driven. When I checked into that work, when I took that growth area year, one of the things that I learned was you're pretty much changing your microphone, right? If ABC calls and needs a Good Morning America promo cut at 10 o'clock at night, you happen to be, having game night with your family. Well, guess what? You get up, you go in, you record, because that's the nature of the work. That's just what has to be done. I wasn't willing to make that lifestyle adjustment at the time because my son was still in school. That's something I may go back to later. Sometimes you find out an area is not what you want it to be. Sometimes you find out I did a year studying animation and got a really great corporate animation gig that paid me 5 figures over the course of that year. So like a new growth area every year. For me, that's usually a new genre. But for the last 3 years, I've concentrated entirely on my coaching in commercial work with one particular coach, Tina Morosco. And I've coached with her for the last 3 years because it's something that I found more challenging, more interesting, and it's something that I just really enjoy.
Yeah. I like that. So just kind of give yourself the benefit of variety and
Yeah.
don't try to master everything. I like that, like one growth area per year. And then you'll probably find maybe it is somebody who's like, you know what, my lifestyle lends itself to this. I really love doing
Yeah.
promo. I love the off the cuff work, or I really love illustration, animation, and I really love playing those characters. I think we've had some voice actors on before who kind of leaned more that direction.
Mhm.
And you don't figure that out until you've kind of dipped a toe into those different
Yeah.
worlds. So there's a lot of things it sounds like you want to start to practice and narrow in on early on, but really nothing replaces get out there, get some jobs. You don't have to commit full time to saying, okay, I'm going to do corporate gigs for the rest of my life.
Right.
It's just a really good place. Just start somewhere, right? Just
Yeah,
pick a lane.
absolutely. For a lot of people, that lane is audiobooks. And for a lot of audiobook narrators, they just fall in love with it, and that's all they do is audiobooks.
Hmm.
Some audiobook narrators come in through that door and they decide a little bit later on, oh, I might want to do some commercial work over here, or I might want to do some animation work over here. And you get to design your voiceover business, which is one of the things I think that is super attractive about what we do.
Mm-hmm. So I know you mentioned most of your attraction marketing comes for your course and like for that side of your business. But what does a voice actor need to have in terms of a hub? Like you want to have sample work. So what framework do you recommend people have as they're doing this outreach? What do you usually send people? What do you want to direct them to? And what do you need to have as your foundation?
Well, that would be your website, right? So you
Hmm.
should have a website and custom domain, which is usually your name, or if your name is taken, your name plus the letters VO for voiceover or my website is paulschmidtvoice.com for my voiceover work. But you need a place to send them. And at the top, front and center of that website should be your demos, right? Because that is the main reason. That's what you want to showcase. Your demo is how we demonstrate our ability and our skill set in this business, right? It is, in effect, our resume. Do we have resumes in our business? Yes. But really, the only people that are going to look at those are agents.
Mm-hmm.
Very occasionally, a national advertiser may ask for your resume. But generally, you get work from your demos and from the actual auditions that you do. In the States, we do a lot more custom auditions than, for example, in UK and Europe. They tend to book more off of your pre-produced demo than for a custom audition. We do it a little bit differently here in the States. But you need a website regardless. People try to take a shortcut. They say, well, I have a profile on voices.com. Well, that's not a website. And you're sending them literally to a platform where there are tens of thousands of other voice actors vying for the same work. Why would you do that? You need your own custom website with your own custom domain and your own custom demos. That's really the calling card, the business card in our business.
Hmm. So take me again back through outreach, because you said you'll do your research to compartmentalize people. You'll put them in these avatars. And then do you have even beyond that, after you've kind of compiled these, you've tested it out, you've had some good response. I guess before we get into like the automation of it or the expansion of it, what goes into a really good pitch inside of the customized, hey, you must be struggling with this or whatever? What other information without being TMI, where you're like, and here's this and this and this, and here's what, like, how brief are we talking with those initial outreach emails and what should they include?
I recommend 125 words or less for that first email, which is not a lot to
Wow.
work with. That's like, if you were to read that out loud, it would take less than a minute, right?
Mm,
Because people are insanely busy and they don't know you from Adam. So you've got to get in, show that you understand them, provide value, and get out as quickly as possible. Your goal, Kirsten, is not to get a gig from them today. It's to start a conversation so that they check out your demo and they go, okay, we can't use her today, but we might have a project coming up down the road. We'll put her in the file. They're going to file your demo. They're going to reach out if and when they have an opportunity that might be right for you. That's all you're trying to accomplish. They don't need to know how you feel about the work, how you were inspired by the theater, and, this, that, and the other thing. They just need to know that you get them and that you can solve their problem so that when a project comes up, they think of you.
And then what does the follow-up look like? You're just kind of assuming, do you try and instigate some kind of a reply from them in that initial email? Or like, how do you kind of chart whether that's a success or not?
Yep. So if you're going to get a reply, typically the way that I teach it, reach out once, and second time a week later, hey, just wondering if you had a chance to check out my demos. Again, here's the problems I solve. And that is 50 words or less. That's just really a reminder, a tickler. The whole goal of those first 2 emails is go to my website and listen to my demos. To get them to do that, again, you have to demonstrate understanding and relevance and value.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it's merely staying top of mind. So we teach, reaching out about quarterly, providing some sort of value, addressing a need, a problem. Maybe it's an article that you came across that you think might be able to help that client or that, even that entire avatar, and staying in touch, but always, always, always providing value and never, never, never asking or begging for work, because they don't care whether you work or not. They care whether you can solve their problem.
Right. Yeah. You're not trying to go on pity. You're trying to go on skill and actually
Absolutely.
be an asset to them.
It's the
So
difference.
How often?
I was going to say, it's the difference between being a beggar and being a consultant.
Yeah. Right. And nobody wants to come across as the beggar. We all want to be in that consultant level of kind of commanding that and being confident that we have something to provide. So how often are we recommending to sending these pitches out, sending these emails out? Should you be constantly, especially in those first few years? This should probably be more of your full-time job, right? Like the client outreach, until you're so busy that you don't have time for client outreach. That should be your primary time spend.
Well, again, if we, one of the reasons we teach the avatar strategy is because you're not researching everybody from soup to nuts every time you reach out. The second thing that we teach is smart automation, using tools like Apollo to automate your follow-up. Because again, once you've had those couple initial touches, you're just trying to stay top of mind. If anybody replies, you're going to jump in and pick that conversation up, right? You're not going to have a chatbot reply to a reply. So we're using the automation to make the follow-up insanely consistent, right? Because depending on what sales and marketing literature you read, it takes between 8 and 13 touches to engage a prospect. You can't send 1 or 2 emails and expect to get on somebody's radar. It doesn't happen. You've got to follow up. It's got to be insanely consistent. And so we use automation to make sure that that happens, but we're always just trying to start a real human conversation. So when you get a reply, now you've got a real live chat going on. And that's when you can demonstrate further value and be warm and friendly and real and relatable and all of that human stuff, which is crucial.
Okay, good to know. Well, we've covered the whole gambit from acquire the skill, learn what you need to learn, become stronger at the craft, all the way into market more effectively, have a little more control over your outreach so that you can actually land the clients. Let's talk a little bit before we wrap up about knowing your worth and those pricing, like the pricing structure. What should somebody be looking at? You don't have to get a deep dive into the details of when you start, you should make X amount of dollars. But even if you're in these like corporate settings, what should you be considering in terms of, just because I'm a beginner, I'm going to do this for free, I'm going to do this for $50. Maybe just give us kind of a range or anything you can recommend in terms of pricing that you might teach your students.
So one of the daunting things about our industry is that every genre has a different pricing structure, right? Audiobooks are priced differently from commercials, which are priced differently from promo work, which is priced differently from in-show narration, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really daunting to try and figure all that out. Fortunately, we have a couple of sources that do have standards, right? If you are a union talent, if you're in SAG-AFTRA, you are bound to work under SAG-AFTRA rates, and those are all pre-negotiated. All those minimums are pre-negotiated. It's called SAG scale, right? So as long as the work pays at least that, and it's done under a SAG contract, you're golden. Your agent or you don't have to negotiate, what am I going to make for this job at the bare minimum? You may, if you're an elite talent or a celebrity, you may multiple times scale, right? Most voice actors are going to have to deal with the union right away. If you're non-union, there is an organization called the Global Voice Acting Academy, and they publish a rate guide called the GVAA Rate Guide, and that is the standard for non-union work in the United States and Canada, right? In the UK, there is an organization called Gravy for the Brain, believe it or not, and they publish a rate card, which is very UK friendly. But in North America, we use the GVAA Rate Guide. It's a little daunting the first time you look at it, especially if you're new to the business. In fact, one of the courses that we offer is called VO Rates 101, and that's where we walk people through the GVAA Rate Guide and through things like negotiation and how to negotiate, what to look for, usage terms, when it's okay to license your voice in perpetuity, meaning forever, and when it's not okay to do that. There's a lot that goes into pricing in this business, and I wish I could give you a little bit better snapshot, but I would say this. Generally, I don't turn the mic on for less than $300. I don't care what it is, because for most genres, I've got to at least get paid for my time. And if I'm going to schedule your job, if I'm going to spend the administrative time to get to know you and what you're looking for and what the specs of the job are, even before I crack the mic, there's time into that, right? And I've got to account for that in the pricing of my business, right? And I, for international voiceover people, you need to price your voiceover work based on your home country, because that's where you are subject to the cost of living. That's where your business expenses are. So that has to work for your home country. So when you get lowball quotes from, I don't mean this to sound insensitive, but from oftentimes third world countries, they don't pay American rates because they can't, right? It's not because they're trying to fleece you. It's because the standard of living and what they normally pay for talent is so much lower than what we are subject to here in the States. So pricing is, admittedly, it's a daunting part of the business to learn. So we try and help voice actors with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great answer. I'm glad that I asked it, just to know that there's resources out there and it doesn't have to be this flying blind thing to just say, I don't know what to charge. I guess we'll do this.
Yeah.
It's helpful to be in that industry knowing that you have the different frameworks that have already been preset so that you can go into that with eyes wide open, knowing what you could possibly expect, at least as a minimum, if you're going to put all that time and effort into growing this as your skill.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the phrase that you used earlier, and that was knowing your worth, is a big deal. And I think this is true for voice actors. I think it's true for any business, especially creative freelancers. Knowing your worth. There is only, I'm new is not an excuse to charge less, right? You don't step on an airplane and go, is it a rookie pilot? Can I get a discount? Right? That's not the way the world works, right? You don't get to charge less because you're new. The only real reason to charge less is because you don't deliver value, right? So if you're not well-trained, if you're not competent, then you have to charge less, right? But if you're trained and you're baseline competent in what you do, then you charge what pros charge.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for adding that. I think that's important for any entrepreneur to hear and to be aware of, because I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome that happens at the beginning of launching anything, especially in the creative space. So just keeping that in mind is really helpful. This has been so enlightening. I love hearing how you've been able to have success, the way that you've built this business, the unique way that you approach getting clients, doing that outreach. It's been so cool. Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
You can find me online. My voiceover business is paulschmidtvoice.com. And the voice actor side of the business is vopro.pro. And then you can find me on the socials and various iterations of VOPro.
Cool. Thank you so much for opening the door, giving us a little insight inside the studio, if you will, and giving our listeners this masterclass on how to be a voiceover actor and succeed and actually make money doing it. It's been so fun to learn.
Well, I have to say, this isn't my first podcast rodeo, and your preparation and the questions that you asked were so insightful. This has been just a thrill for me. So thanks.
Oh, of course. I'm glad it was mutually beneficial. So it's been fun. We'll have to have you on again.
I'd love to. Thanks so much.